Well, thank you all for listening in. It's nice to basically tell you a little bit about what's going on in the well, I would say a bit bigger than a Dutch ecosystem. You know, the Netherlands is just really so small, so basically it's pretty hard to actually see anything exactly inside. So we take very naturally a bit of a bigger scope. But I'd like to say, in any case, just to introduce a little bit what my background is. I founded Holland Fintech about 5 years ago to actually sort of drive the fintech innovation forward, as we saw that we're sort of coming up with all kinds of startups becoming active in the financial industry, which I think by now has evolved into a really vibrant, changing financial landscape, which is actually becoming broader and broader and actually is overpassing what we traditionally would see as the financial industry. And it creates great opportunities to actually create something of inclusive solutions, because it's just technology makes a lot of things more accessible, but not per se by itself better understandable. And that's really where the work comes in. How do we help everyone understand how these tech developments are changing finance and helping people make choices based on these changes? So that's why we focus on creating an inclusive ecosystem, because we can only actually do that if all participants are coming along. That means we work with a lot of startups, but also incumbent players, regulators, policymakers, but also advisors like law firms or consultants who play an important role in framing what we think is happening in the ecosystem and how you can collaborate. Traditionally, the Netherlands has a really nice view. I mean, you all know, of course, that we're famous for windmills, wooden shoes, and tulips, although it's pretty hard to actually find the latter two very often in the Netherlands because no one actually wears these things. But we do have a lot of windmills, and it's an interesting analogy to actually check back where that's where the collaborative nature comes from. The Dutch people had to collaborate to keep the land dry because they had to build dikes around a really big area where multiple people lived and cooperate to finance those dikes and windmills to keep it dry. And that's sort of where the cooperative nature comes from that actually sparked the first stock exchange being risen in 1602 and actually therefore being a really big force in innovating in a financial ecosystem. And I think that cooperative mentality combined with the trade mentality that the Dutch are known for as well is really driving innovation forward in this perspective. Also in the digital world, as you see that actually in the Netherlands is one of the biggest internet crossings of Europe. So you can really see that translated into how the Dutch are adapting to the digital ecosystem, because we're right up there if you look into sort of connectivity, right? So I was just looking at this picture of trying to log into your bank account. Well, it's pretty hard to recognize that if you know that, you know, internet connection is just always at Wi-Fi plus speeds everywhere that you go. And that makes it really easy to do business, especially in the digital and fintech world. And there's really a lot going on because, of course, traditionally, it's been a bit of a, let's say, I would say conservative country, as generally as I see as bigger trends across nations. Countries or cultures that are doing very well tend to be less innovative than the ones that actually have a lot to gain from innovation, right? So innovation is based on driving a need rather than, you know, doing something for fun. And if you're doing very well, there's less inclination to actually innovate. But it's funny to see that actually now that even though the Dutch market is still doing quite well, there's quite a big appetite to start changing because the opportunity is just so big. So here you basically see, for example, the funding rounds, the big startup funding rounds of 2018, and how many of them actually have a fintech flavor and how much money is going into that. Quite a very active venture capital ecosystem, also partly because we have one of the biggest pension wealth accumulations as well across the world. Which basically is driving a lot of investments in all kinds of asset classes, including venture capital. Of course, we have the regulators who play an important role in the financial system as well. So the Financial Markets Authority on the right, as well as the Dutch Central Bank, DNB, both have recognized that they are not really fit to deal with challenges of digitization and fintech early on. So they started an innovation hub as well as a regulatory sandbox. I'm not saying that they're the biggest successes out there because they don't have a competitive mandate if you would compare it, for example, with the FCA in the UK. So they're still struggling a little bit. How do we actually open up and really make it easier for parties to enter the market? But I think one of the positive changes we see is that they have issued a couple of new banking licenses and that they're in constant dialogue with the market these days. And so what we see that there is a thriving ecosystem, partly driven by especially market participants like ourselves actually trying to open up, facilitate cooperation between all parties. And now with a member ecosystem of around 550 companies, we see that we encompass most of the bigger industries, players as well as all the startups that we can find crossing borders very, very often. As you can see, we're well connected across the world, and we've got some great events coming up later in 2020. So I recognize you all come over and check it out for yourselves. Thank you for listening.